You have been told your whole life that salt is dangerous. Watch your sodium. Reduce your salt. Your doctor says it. The packaging says it. The dietary guidelines say it. And they are right about one thing. Too much salt consumed in food, especially in processed food, creates serious cardiovascular problems. That is not what today's video is about. Today is about something that nobody has told you. That salt applied externally on the skin activates one of the oldest, most efficient regulatory mechanisms in the human body, and that after 60, this mechanism becomes more necessary than at any other point in your life, because the body's natural drainage systems, the ones that remove waste, reduce inflammation, and keep your circulation moving, have been slowing down for years without any obvious warning sign. I'm Dr. Jake Taylor. Write your country in the comments right now, and if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. I make these videos every week for people over 60 who want practical health information they can use starting tonight. Let me tell you about Dorothy. She was 68 and had been managing what she described as generalized fatigue for 3 years. Not exhaustion, not illness, just a persistent heaviness that sat in her legs by the afternoon, a brain fog that made mornings feel like wading through something thick, and a sleep that never felt complete no matter how many hours she got. Her blood work was normal. Her physician described her as healthy for her age. She had accepted this as what 68 felt like. When I asked about her circulation history, her feet and ankles swelled slightly by evening. She had chalked it up to being on her feet. When I asked about her mornings, she described waking with a head that felt full, not painful, just heavy and slow to clear. I suggested a protocol: external salt application, 5 specific zones of the body, applied in the right way, at the right temperature, in the right sequence. She looked at me the way most patients look when I describe this: skeptical, polite, willing to try because nothing else had moved the needle. At 4 weeks, she came back. The leg heaviness was largely gone. Her mornings had shifted from foggy to clear within 20 minutes of waking instead of 2 hours. She was sleeping in a way she described as actually restoring. She said something I have heard in different forms from dozens of patients since. It sounds too simple to work, and it worked. Today, I am going to show you exactly what she did, the biology behind why it works, and the 5 body zones that produce the most significant results when this protocol is applied consistently. Here is the foundational concept you need before any of this makes sense. We are not terrestrial creatures from a biochemical perspective. We are oceanic creatures. Your blood, your lymph, your cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid that bathes your brain, all of it is saline solution. Sodium chloride is not a foreign substance to your body. It is your body's native language. When you consume excessive salt through food, especially processed food, the problem is systemic overload through the digestive pathway. The kidneys cannot process it fast enough. Fluid is retained, pressure builds. That is a real and serious problem. But when you apply salt externally on intact skin, something entirely different occurs. Osmosis activates. Your body has a precise law it follows without exception. Water moves from where there is lower solute concentration toward where there is higher concentration. When salt is applied to the skin, it creates an osmotic pressure differential. The interstitial fluid in the tissues beneath, fluid that contains metabolic waste products, inflammatory cytokines, and cellular debris, begins moving toward the surface. Think of it as opening a drainage valve in a pool that has been allowed to stagnate. This is not alternative medicine. This is applied physics interacting with human biology. And after 60, when the efficiency of your lymphatic drainage has declined, when your venous tone has weakened, when your tissues have been accumulating what they should have been eliminating, this mechanism becomes one of the most accessible and underused tools available. There is one more dimension worth understanding before we get to the 5 zones. After 60, the body's inflammatory regulation becomes less precise. Cytokines, the signaling proteins that manage inflammatory responses, accumulate in interstitial fluid when lymphatic drainage is compromised. This is the biological basis of the diffuse, low-level inflammation that underlies most of what we call age-related deterioration. the joint stiffness that is worse in the morning, the brain fog that lifts slowly, the sleep that feels shallow no matter how many hours you spend in bed. External salt application addresses this accumulated inflammatory load directly by facilitating the movement of cytokine-containing fluid toward the lymphatic system where it can be processed and cleared. This is why the effects of the protocol extend far beyond the specific zone being treated. Reducing inflammatory burden in one area reduces the systemic load that affects every other system. Understanding this one principle is the foundation for everything that follows. Let me show you the 5 zones, starting with the one that affects the most people, and moving to the one that surprises people the most. Your feet and lower legs are where this protocol produces its first and most immediate results, and the reason involves a concept most people have never heard: the peripheral heart. You have 2 pumping systems in your body. The heart in your chest is obvious. The peripheral heart is your calf muscles. The gastrocnemius and soleus muscles of the lower leg act as venous and lymphatic pumps, pushing blood and lymph back toward the heart against gravity every time they contract. In a young, active body, this pump works continuously and efficiently. After decades of sedentary sitting, reduced physical activity, and the natural decline in muscle tone that comes with age, this pump weakens. The result is blood and lymphatic fluid pooling in the lower extremities, ankles that swell by evening, legs that feel heavy and unresponsive, night cramps that wake you at 3 a.m., and a systemic consequence most people never connect to their feet: less efficient circulation reaching the brain, kidneys, and liver, because blood stagnating in the lower body is blood not arriving where it needs to go. The protocol for the feet and lower legs: dissolve 3 tablespoons of sea salt or rock salt in 1 liter of warm water at approximately 38 degrees Celsius. Not hotter. Excessive heat dilates superficial vessels and can worsen venous insufficiency in people who already have it. Soak 2 cotton socks in this solution, wring them until they do not drip, and apply them over the feet and ankles while lying with the legs slightly elevated on a cushion. Leave them in place for 15 to 20 minutes. Do this for 7 consecutive nights, rest 4 days, then repeat the cycle. In my clinical experience, the majority of patients following this protocol notice measurable improvement in leg heaviness and ankle swelling between day 5 and day 10. The mechanism is the osmotic pull of accumulated fluid from the interstitial spaces closest to the skin, combined with the mild thermal stimulus that supports lymphatic movement in a region where gravity has been working against circulation all day. When peripheral drainage improves, the effects are not limited to the legs. The heart works with less resistance. Blood pressure often stabilizes without medication adjustment. Sleep improves. Everything is connected. William was 69 and had been accepting what he called the evening shutdown as an inevitable part of getting older. By 4 in the afternoon, his legs felt as though they were filled with concrete. He sat down when he got home and found it difficult to motivate himself to move again. He attributed this to age, to years of physical work, to just how things were now. What he had not connected was that this peripheral stagnation was also responsible for his poor sleep, his mental sluggishness in the mornings, and the fact that he never felt genuinely rested. At the end of week 1 of the foot protocol, he reported that the 4 o'clock shutdown had not happened for the last 3 days. At 3 weeks, he described himself as having an evening again, meaning hours between work and sleep that felt alive rather than simply endured. Now, let me move from the foundation of the body upward to a region that is physiologically dense and almost universally ignored. The neck and the area behind the ears contain some of the largest lymph nodes in the body: the deep and superficial cervical nodes, the retroauricular nodes, the submandibular nodes. These are the filters that process lymphatic fluid from the head, scalp, face, and brain. When these nodes are congested, the impact on neurological function is direct and measurable. The brain conducts its own cleaning process during sleep. Researchers have called it the lymphatic system. Waste products, including amyloid beta proteins associated with cognitive decline, are flushed from brain tissue during deep sleep cycles. This flushing depends on lymphatic drainage descending through the cervical nodes. When those nodes are congested, the brain's overnight cleaning cycle is compromised. The clinical result is something millions of people experience and attribute to aging: waking with a heavy head, morning brain fog that takes hours to clear, occasional ear ringing without apparent cause, and that progressive memory softening that most people accept as inevitable. The protocol: dissolve half a teaspoon of fine salt in a glass of warm water. Wet your fingertips with this solution and apply with very gentle circular movements to the area immediately behind each earlobe, descending slowly along the side of the neck to the collarbone. The goal is not deep massage. It is to activate superficial circulation and create an osmotic gradient in the tissues where the lymphatic capillaries are most accessible. Repeat 7 to 10 circles on each side each morning. Dorothy was 72 and had lived with what she described as a permanent helmet, a heaviness from the moment she woke that persisted until mid-morning, regardless of how many hours she had slept. She had mentioned it to 3 physicians over 5 years. None had connected it to cervical lymphatic drainage. When I explained the mechanism and the role of overnight lymphatic clearance depending on downstream drainage through these very nodes, something shifted. She had been treating the symptom with morning coffee and patience while the cause, chronically congested cervical nodes, remained unaddressed. 3 weeks of the morning neck drainage technique and she told me the helmet was gone. Not reduced. Gone. I slept the same hours I always slept, she said. But for the first time in years, I woke up on the other side of sleep instead of still inside it. Let me tell you about Robert. He was a 71-year-old retired physician who came to me not as a patient but as a skeptic. He had been experiencing what he described as morning cognitive sluggishness for 2 years. He was sharp by midday, but the first 2 hours after waking felt like operating through gauze. He had tried everything in his own toolkit. Nothing had moved it. He agreed to try the cervical protocol for 3 weeks out of professional curiosity. At 3 weeks, he told me that his morning cognitive window had shifted from 2 hours of fog to 20 minutes. He said, "I dismissed this because it was too simple. That was the wrong filter." Before I tell you about the next 2 zones, I want to stop for a moment. If this is making connections that nobody has made for you before, subscribe right now. We publish every single week for people over 60 who deserve direct, practical information rather than being told everything looks fine. 3 seconds. Subscribe and stay with me. The hands are instruments of work, and we treat them as such. What most people do not know is that the cortical representation of the hands in the human brain is disproportionately large relative to their physical size. In the cortical homunculus, the neurological map of the body, the hands occupy nearly half the space. This means that sensory and motor input from the hands has a direct and powerful influence on the state of the central nervous system. The inner surface of the wrist is where the radial pulse is palpable and where the median and ulnar nerves run close to the skin surface. Applying a gentle osmotic stimulus to this zone has a documented effect on peripheral nerve conductivity, and the mechanical relaxation of the intrinsic hand musculature sends a direct signal to the autonomic nervous system, facilitating the transition from sympathetic alert mode into parasympathetic recovery mode. This is the transition that is necessary for sleep to be genuinely restorative. Take 1 tablespoon of coarse salt, moisten it slightly to the consistency of damp sand, and work it slowly between both palms. Give deliberate attention to each finger joint, to the spaces between the fingers, and finish with gentle friction over the inner surface of each wrist. Rinse with warm water and do not dry completely. Allow the skin to absorb the remaining mineral moisture. Helen was 66 and had been experiencing fine motor tremor in her hands that had caused her to give up embroidery, which had been her primary source of calm for 30 years. She had been told it was an age-related change and that nothing could be done short of medication with side effects she was unwilling to accept. After incorporating nightly salt hand baths for 20 days, she described the sensation as having thick, invisible gloves removed. The tremor reduced sufficiently for her to return to her embroidery within a month. Her sleep also improved markedly during this period, which she had not expected. The hand relaxation protocol had quieted her autonomic nervous system in a way that allowed sleep to do what it was supposed to do. Now, the lower back. This zone is important enough that I want you to understand why before I give you the protocol, because most people think of the lower back as a structural problem when they think about it at all. At the level of the first and second lumbar vertebrae, immediately above the kidneys, sit the adrenal glands. These small glands regulate your stress response, your cortisol production, your adrenaline, your DHEA, and your immune function. They have a direct influence on systemic inflammation, metabolic energy, and the quality of your sleep architecture. After 60, and particularly after decades of sustained pressure from work, family, and accumulated life stress, the adrenal glands are frequently in a state of functional fatigue, not disease, not failure, cumulative exhaustion that standard blood tests do not reliably detect, but that expresses itself as the battery that never fully recharges, the difficulty getting out of bed that is not depression, the absence of the morning energy you used to have and have accepted as gone. Warm salt applied to the lumbar zone acts on 3 levels simultaneously. The heat improves local microcirculation, increasing blood flow to the pericapsular tissue of the kidneys and adrenal glands. The mild electrical currents generated by warm salt in contact with the skin have documented effects on local autonomic nerve activity, and the mechanical relaxation of the paravertebral musculature reduces compression on the nerve roots and vessels supplying this region. Heat a cup of plain salt in a dry pan until it is comfortably warm, not burning. Check it against the back of your hand. Transfer it to a cotton cloth bag and apply it to the lower back for 10 to 15 minutes before sleep. 7 consecutive nights, then rest, then repeat. George was 74 and described his body as an old battery that would not hold a charge. He had good days, but no consistent energy. Mornings were his worst time. He had been told his adrenal function was within normal limits on testing. Within 2 weeks of the lumbar salt protocol, he reported that his morning energy had shifted in a way he had not expected. By 4 weeks, the change in his voice, his posture, and his affect was visible to his wife before he had mentioned anything to her. She asked him what he had changed. He said he was not sure she would believe him. She believed him when she saw the difference. And now the zone that surprises my patients most when I mention it. The navel. For most people, the navel is a scar, an anatomical remnant of the umbilical cord, a reminder that you were once entirely dependent on another body for your survival. But for anyone who understands the deep physiology of the enteric nervous system and the vascular anatomy of the abdominal cavity, the navel is significantly more than that. During embryonic development, the navel was your only connection to life. Through it came oxygen, nutrients, and hormonal signals. The umbilical cord was cut at birth, but the nervous and vascular connections converging toward that zone remain active throughout your entire life. Behind the umbilical ring sits one of the densest autonomic nerve networks in the abdomen. The celiac and mesenteric plexuses, which regulate the function of nearly every digestive organ, have branches distributed throughout this region. The vagus nerve, the great modulator of the parasympathetic nervous system, has terminations that are especially responsive to stimuli in the periumbilical area. Applying warm saline solution to the navel is not esoteric practice. It is a way of providing gentle, direct stimulation to the most important autonomic nerve network in the abdomen. What occurs with regular practice is that the enteric nervous system, the second brain living in your gut, receives a signal of safety, a signal that the environment is stable, that it can shift from alert mode to regulation mode. There is a physiological detail here that connects to something many older adults experience without ever understanding the cause. The vagus nerve is the primary pathway through which the brain and the gut communicate. When vagal tone is low, digestion is impaired, sleep is shallow, and a persistent low-level tension settles into the body without a clear cause. People describe it as a background hum that is always present and never fully resolved. The periumbilical stimulation protocol directly addresses vagal tone. The gentle osmotic and thermal stimulus activates vagal afferent fibers, which signal upward to the brainstem that the body is in a safe and supported state. The parasympathetic response follows. Heart rate slows slightly. Digestion activates. Sleep becomes possible in a way it was not before. The protocol is gentle and takes 3 minutes. Each evening, take a small amount of fine salt on the tip of your index finger and with very gentle, almost pressureless movements, clean the umbilical cavity with this moistened salt. Then, place a few drops of warm saline solution directly into the navel and lie on your back for 3 to 4 minutes, simply breathing while the solution works. Nothing more. Margaret was 70 and described a sensation she had carried for years that she called a stone in the belly, not pain. A persistent low-level constriction that lived in her abdomen and that she had been told was irritable bowel syndrome, anxiety, or simply her constitution. She had a chronic pattern of waking between 2 and 4 a.m. with a sensation of tightness in her midsection that took an hour to resolve. Her sleep was never deep. Her digestion was never settled. At 3 weeks of the umbilical protocol, she described something I have heard in similar words from patients ever since. She said it felt as though something that had been clenched for a very long time had quietly let go. Her sleep became continuous for the first time in years. Her digestion settled, and she noticed, as she put it, that her shoulders had stopped living near her ears. When the center of the body is regulated, the rest responds. This is not metaphor. It is the vagus nerve doing what it was designed to do when the periumbilical region provides the signal it is waiting for. Let me bring this together now into the complete practical protocol, because I do not want you to leave this video with a list you cannot act on. Begin tonight with whichever zone feels most urgent for you. For most people, that will be the feet, because the effects are felt quickly and the improvement in sleep that follows peripheral drainage is noticeable within the first week. Add one zone every 5 to 7 days, rather than attempting all 5 simultaneously. Your body responds better to gradual sequential introduction than to radical change across multiple systems at once. The foot and ankle soak. 7 consecutive nights, rest 4 days, repeat. The cervical massage, daily each morning as part of your existing washing routine, no additional time required. The hand salt friction, each evening before sleep, 5 minutes, the most accessible stress regulation tool you will ever have. The lumbar salt compress, 7 consecutive nights before sleep, rest, repeat. The umbilical protocol, each evening, 3 minutes, the final piece of the sequence. The timeline, within the first 3 to 5 days of the foot protocol, most people notice reduced leg heaviness and improved sleep depth. Within 2 weeks of adding the cervical protocol, morning brain clarity typically shifts noticeably. Within 3 to 4 weeks of the hand protocol implemented nightly, sleep architecture improves and morning stress response reduces. The lumbar and umbilical protocols produce their most significant effects between weeks 3 and 6 of consistent practice, when the autonomic nervous system has had time to establish a new baseline of regulation. You are not experiencing a body in decline. You are experiencing a body that has accumulated stagnation in specific systems that were never given the tools to clear it. Salt, applied with precision, consistency, and the right temperature to the right zones, is one of the oldest biological tools available for exactly this problem. It does not replace medical care. It does not replace medication where medication is genuinely needed. What it does is address the layer of circulatory, lymphatic, and autonomic stagnation that accumulates silently over decades and that no prescription has ever been written for. Tell me in the comments which of these 5 zones you are going to start with tonight. And tell me if any of the symptoms I described, the leg heaviness, the morning fog, the sleep that does not restore, the persistent tension in the center of your body, is something you have been experiencing and accepting as simply how things are now. I read every comment. Your response helps me understand what this community is dealing with and what to address next. If this video gave you something useful, share it right now with someone over 60 who has been told their fatigue and heaviness are just aging and there is nothing to be done about it. That conversation might be the most practically useful one you have with them this week. I'm Dr. Jake Taylor. Subscribe if you have not already. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next video.